Good morning. I'm Aurian Archive. This is Build Theory. And today I'm looking at an ice battle axe ice tank. Or alternatively, because of where this came from, an ice tank. I've gone over in previous streams why, for the most part, most tanks wind up taking Darkest Night, and it is because of the extra taunting capabilities and the fact that Darkest Night benefits all all types equally. It benefits regeneration types such as willpower and bioarmor. It benefits defense types such as ice armor and shield. It benefits resist armors like electric or fire. You get good mileage out of Soul Mastery for every single power set, primary in the tanker or brute sets, and as well as for not only mechanically its ability to aid with aggro, it's a good all-rounder. But if you're going for thematics, you want an ice, or you want an ice something, you can. I've still got a ice shield ice tank. Uh, And yeah, that's a perfectly valid way to go. And I'm starting out this particular video. I don't actually have any one of the current characters up on the screen. We're still kind of working on that Arachnos and getting her some incarnate salvage to fill up some slots. So we'll be working on that in the background while I actually talk about the build so you know what's going on. And we're actually starting with a bit of a mea culpa in regards to something that happened, well, a very long time ago, sometime around issue 5, issue 6. Long enough ago that the pictures were still in a photo bucket album uh, from that time period. And yes, as a hosting service, PhotoBucket has collectively shot themselves. That's a different topic. Anyway, so years ago, I made an axe something. I can't even remember what the power set was. I, since I'm not going to actually go and look the photos up and tell you what the icons were, it was an axe, and the big part about it was as I was going around Paragon City, axe was supposed to do knockdown. But time and time again, every single creature that I went up against that I used an attack on X from, the enemy would go flying. And just moon launch away. And that was aggressively problematic because I was playing a melee character. And this is really where a lot of my own personal animus towards knockback originates from, is from those early characters when you literally could kill your own character. You would die as a character in the game because you knocked an enemy away and you couldn't close the gap fast enough to continue to lay on damage, and they'd be able to get off 2 or 3 attacks and just flat out, stomp your character. And that's a miserable game experience. And I hated it. And there were other mechanical problems with Knock. I went on a couple of missions with teams, and one of those early level missions is Rescue the Fate Weaver, which takes place normally in Perez Park, normally in a cave system. And every single time I took this character on a Rescue the Fate Weaver mission, I would knock an enemy out of the cave. That's how bad the knock system was. And if you were using knock in any kind of caves map, anything from Circle of Thorns to in the Roman stand-in to Cimararans and the Imperious Task Force or Time Zero, to the villain side with the Moo and the cave system there. Anytime you were in a cave system and you're using a knock power, there was an even chance that you were going to knock an enemy through a wall. And right now, one of the reasons why I went ahead and brought up the characters is I'm currently in the Atta Caves map. Now, in the Atta Caves map, I wouldn't so much call it a problem so much as an observation, but you might notice that there are enemies who are right next to holes in geometry, little rocks sticking out of the caves. If you were running a character with knock and you were running the Atta mission, it was very easy to knock a troll into the wall and into one of those cracks. Little cracks in the boulders here, you can push an enemy through. Any place where you see an object sticking out of the wall, you could push an enemy through it. And again, just a miserable play experience. And because of that, that's one of the reasons why knock is so utterly reviled among older players, because we can remember having to wait hours for a GM to respond to bring one single enemy, back inside the map that was only outside of the map because of a knock power. To be fair to both Cryptic and Paragon, they did spend some time fixing most of the geo holes and creating various scripted workarounds that lessen the impact of being able to knock an enemy outside of intentional targeted areas. That didn't change it being a complete pain in the rear end. So couple those two together. Battle Axe has a significant amount of knock listed in the powers. My own experience with it that I took to the forums, it's not knockback, or it's not knockdown, it's knockback, and several pictures that were, and I posted to the cryptic forums showing that my character is not doing knockdown. My character is doing knockback to the effect of it's a problem. Now, flash forward, and what I know now, if I had known then, is a lot of the enemies I was going up against were weak to knockback. Of course, I'm going to send a clockwork flying with any kind of knock power. They have very little knock resistance, in some cases, no knock resistance. And that was something because at that time, Cryptic was very much about hiding real numbers. Everything's just described in vague terms. That information was not casually available to the player base. And there was no way to make it uncasually available to the player base. It's now available now, and it's good to know. And there's other players who, in recent years, have also had problems with, well, does this power do knock? I don't want this power to do knock. I'm interfering with my teammates. I don't want to interfere with my teammates. And Overwhelming Force, introduced in the Blockbuster Summer event, was an admission from the live developers from Paragon that, okay, knock is still a problem. All of the things we've done aren't actually addressing the gameplay implications. And then over the course of the secret server, we added sudden acceleration, which is a knock set that also gives more options for knockback to knockdown. That sudden acceleration is the only reason a war shade is playable. Yes, that's for a topic for later video. And for various reasons, I got around to making a Battle Axe Ninjutsu Scrapper, the first X character that I'd made since that ugly confrontation with Cryptic so many years ago. I'm just like what this set is saying it's going to do is not what it's doing. It's doing something else. This is a problem. Well, as you can see on the screen, when I actually made my Battle Axe Scrapper, I didn't actually do any knockback mitigation. Going across chop, gash, swoop, cleave, pendulum, whirling axe didn't have any knockback. It does have knockdown, but all of these powers I didn't bother to mitigate knockback. In fact, the only one that I mitigated any knock on was, well, Energy Torrent. And that's because it's got a massive amount of cone knockback away. And what I had discovered playing, and this was true with a mace set, is that as you ramp the difficulty up, you got enemies that were higher level than your character. They became, by level difference, a little bit more resistant to various status effects, to the point where if you're running +2, in general, the enemies are going to be high enough that even with minions, you'll only knock them down. You won't moonshot them away from you and give them chances to get an extra hits or give uh, give them a chance to belay a status effect on you. It's and that was kind of a key point. And again, we know that Cryptic wasn't ever really playing on the same server that the players were playing on. They weren't dogfooding the same game that the player base was playing, and that's a critical distinction. Is your developers must dog food must actively engage in playing the same game that the players are playing. Otherwise, you do wind up with a massive gap between the expectations of the developers because they're playing a different game than what the players are playing. And there's been legion examples of Cryptic playing a completely different game from the players, and the players having no idea why various changes were implemented. Case in point being regeneration, which again is a topic for another video. Staying on topic with X, so keeping this in mind, moving forward, where on my own character, I once I was able to scale the difficulty up and start taking on higher opponents on average, I was not feeling pressured as a player to mitigate the knockback, so I didn't. And that's something to keep in mind if you're making max character and you're leveling up is you may want to have a leveling build that has sudden accelerations in every power that's listed for a uh, knock down or knock back. And then when you get to high level and you have some more power slotted and you can handle higher level enemies on average, that's when you can go back and really just take the sudden accelerations out and maximize the build you're actually using. Okay, uh, and I kind of want to. This is why I'm starting with that because this is a look at how I built an axe build, and this has been act before. I've been active before. Well, how did I find ninjutsu on a scrapper? And my response has been, this character. Well, she was a concept. She was a concept character. I was messing around with costumes, and for some reason, I brought up battle axe. I was just looking through it, and the Rikti sword coupled with one of the costumes that I had, and this was for another play. This was for another player who was running an axe build. I just went, I've got to do that concept, and that's something to keep in mind. That concept-based builds can be surprising, can take you places you didn't expect to go. But how did the character actually perform? Well, to put it this way, I accidentally main tanked a statesman task force. Yeah. Okay. So going, that's a little bit on the history of Axe, a little bit of why some of the slotting choices are being made, why there's conflicting information. Where if you go through and you're aware of my old blog spot, you're aware of some of the things that I wrote, posted on the cryptic forums. If you're aware of some of the things I posted on the Paragon forums, if the developers, it's like hi there, Castle. How are you doing? Um, if some of the developers are, watching this years later and go like, you said something completely different. What changed? Well, what changed was I actually played one and we got real data to explain what was going on. And that makes all the difference, not hiding things from your player base. All right. Uh, that's where I really wanted to start on that. Is first of all, so you could see how I had set up my own X character, and at least she's an X ninjutsu stalker, not a tank. And now we can kind of focus on what's in the background. Because what's in the background is one of the more recent ice tanks that I worked on. This was an ice radiation fire blast, And when I was making these particular builds, we were testing something that may or may not still be on the cards. I don't know if it is, and that was different tank tertiary powers. And I've gotten here. It's I may have left them as concept builds, but this was okay. I'm going to bring up in the primary window here. You can also see that this build was made before the changes to Mace to move Clobber around. In this case, Clobber's been moved to 28, and something else has been moved way lower. Uh, and I got Clobber placed at 20. Whirling, swap places with Whirling Mace to give the PPAOE late earlier in the passes. Uh, but I called this one Ice Mace Pyre R1 Rad Tertiary Placeholder. And if you're wondering what that meant, is at one point we were testing incarnate style uh, toggle effects added in the tertiary powers. In this case, the radiation was a radiation. Uh, there's another one I need to swap: Melt Armor and Fireball. Yeah, mark slots is invalid, and we'll actually we'll do a quick fix here, and while I'm thinking about it, in flight. Slots and enhancement slots, auto arrange all slots. Okay. And now we'll save as fix. Okay. Anyway, so the thing was with the radiation armor is you had a radiation effect that was a toggle. And so I ran this configuration where it had a hold, it had a targeted AoE, and it had a toggle. And didn't have any. And when we were testing this, it didn't have any invention slots enabled for the toggle. Because that was still up in the air on how it was going to work, what it was going to work like. So I just left Melt Armor with 2 endurance reductions in there. And that's also kind of the reason why I still have 2 Ice Mace tanks. The thing was, when you did this, the Sentinel imports, if you were using Titan Sentinel, uh, I saved both of the Ice Mace tank that I had, because one Ice Mace tank was one of the first characters I made on my own account, and she won a couple of costume contests, and I was always very proud of her costume, and I couldn't bear to part with her, even though I never actually played on the server she was on past level 10. Keep in mind this was back in 2003 and 2004, so uh, I found other servers where there were people who were online and actually running missions when I was available to play, and that's kind of a key distinction I know I've hit it on previous live streams. So I kept her, and she was part of the Titan Sentinel import. And I had also had because I liked Ice Mace so much, I'd made Ice Mace on the server that I actually played on that I had gotten to level 50, and she was also in the Titan Sentinel imports. And I still, over the course at a secret server, could not bring myself to delete uh, my costume contest winning Ice Mace, even though I already had an Ice Mace that was imported at level 50. So when the new tertiaries came around, I thought it was maybe a good time to differentiate between the two. And that's one of the reasons why these builds are still in there, because if those tanker tertiaries ever land, some of them had very compelling powers. One thing that I did highly disagree with the power developers on is I think that the debuff powers like Darkest Night, the Chilling Embrace, I think that was in a tertiary uh, a rework on there were a couple of different things that were in there. But I argued that the debuff powers needed to be available at level 35, and the idea is that, and this may have been rendered invalid by the tanker upgrades that did land after testing. And that was if you're not going to bring the tanker up on par, where it's a compelling option to other melee classes, you need to give it an ability that lets it be useful in comparison to other classes. Is why would you bring a tank along? Well, if you give tanks a very powerful melee based debuff, where they have to actually be in the midst of the battle to use their debuff, and you get it to them in their mid level at 35, you've now got a compelling reason for teams who maybe can't find a defender, can't find a corruptor, there's, not, no masterminds, no debuff classes around, or strong debuff classes around, a tank could fill in and handle that debuff. It may only be good at debuffing one aspect, but it would be a strong reason to to make tanks a viable option beyond just, well, they take damage. Well, what else do they do? Well, they take damage. Well, tanks can now dish out AoE melee damage. Tanks are, in some cases, and this is one of the reasons why I do have the tank up that's on screen, is she is a uh, dark armor energy melee, which, if you remember, the Cryptic Years was one of the worst performing sets possible. Energy melee has long been the uh, whooping child at the red-headed stepchild at the bottom of the pack, only surpassed in its inability to put down damage by staff melee. And even then, arguably, staff melee was better at putting down AoE damage. Anyway, so energy melee, and you've been watching me plow through the mobs in the back with the tanker changes, the changes to energy melee. My energy melee tank is plowing through plus four X8 mobs almost as quickly as, possibly quicker than even some brutes. Now, part of that is down to impossible levels of optimization, and part of that is down to picking incarnate abilities that coincide with the aspects. Right now, I'm running Reactive Core on this particular build, and you can see I'm running Vigor. And I could swap to Spiritual, and I'm running Vigor because she's an Endurance Hog at full tilt. Anyways, so kind of keeping that in mind, that the tanker changes have now made tankers a compelling mob focused. If you were going full tilt into a mob, a tanker will, in some cases, outperform a brute for dropping entire mobs of enemies. And that's a very important distinction. That makes some of the fights, such as the Barracuda, uh, hold out against Strikesmen. So much easier if you've got a couple of tanks. They are much better at laying down the taunt and melee damage, the the target capped AoE damage, to help make that fight more manageable rather than your squishies, well, taking it on the chin. And that kind of flash forward, flash back. The changes that were proposed, the new tertiary powers, adding debuffs to tanks in a melee format, might, in some cases, make them more powerful than brutes. And I'm not really sure that's an entirely effective direction to take. This is one of those where I haven't heard anything about the new tertiaries. I don't know if they're still on the drawing board or if something else, since tankers have now been upgraded substantially. They're no longer the bottom tier for, yeah, you're just going to take damage. What else do you do? And so, kind of keeping that in mind, and I realize I'm just taking a long time to explain the theory behind, well, why is this power set here, rather than talking about an actual build. And that's because the actual build for a Ice Mace to Battle Axe tank is going to be ludicrously simple. And yeah, I've kind of just wasted a lot of time dancing around the issue. And we're going to bring up Ice, and we're going to do Ice Mace Pyre Farm, the Ice Mace Pyre Farm fix. Alright, this gives us Ice Armor, War Mace. You can see that we've got Pyre Mastery. We're still rocking Melt Armor. And oh yeah, we'll leave it on this one. And we'll bring open our ice. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Okay. And we'll get our build in the background, open to the same thing. Ice Mace Pyre Farm R fix. Alright. And now we got that open in the background so we can keep track of our powers. And now I'm just going to do War Mace, Battle Axe. Yeah, I just changed power sets. That's how little has to change. Because everything else is in the same spot. Again, when you start accounting for the level difference, what you can take as damage, how the higher level enemies that you can take, you're not really worried about uh, dealing with specific. Um, you're not worried about dealing with specific. How can I say this? You're not worried about flinging enemies away from you. It's just you're not. All right, but the player who was looking for build or trying to make their own wanted an ice battle ice. So we'll do that next. But before we go that far, we are going to work through some of the power choices so you can understand what's going on here. And again, this is why I took that time to explain the tertiary powers, because those are still in effect on some of the other builds. Melt Armor is still, instead of having a debuff set, was still slotted for 2 endurance reductions. And this is why this was for a farm build. Just so you know, that's why that slotting choice was made. Excuse me. I may have to go. I'm going to have to go find a bottle of water. I'll be right back. Okay, let's see if that's any better. All right. And since I didn't actually have to do much work, okay, frozen armor. And this character was, or this build was really designed to go into a fire farm. And this was actually based on a brute. A uh, Actually, why don't I go get the brute? Uh, let's lock her off. We'll turn. Well, okay, we'll turn both of you off. And I'm in Telos as I wait for the game to do its things. Anyway, so this framework was built on. Let's go. Hang on. Why don't I just bring up the brute build in the background? Brute claws, ice, R3 damages. What was the most recent one I worked on? Okay, R4. Oh, all of those are. This may or may not work. Yeah, it worked. Okay. Sorry, I think I had some expired apple pie yesterday. I mean, I put it into the oven. Uh, what I thought should have been enough time to kill anything that could have been growing on it, but man, I am not so certain this morning. I want Talos. Yeah, I'm kind of I'm hauling my brute to Talos to continue working on the Arachnos. I mean, if I'm gonna, just have characters sitting in the background, might as well at least be doing something useful. Uh, and incidentally, this will also be one of the. Um, you will notice very quickly that there is a discrepancy between the build that's actually on screen and the character that's well in play. Invite, yes. See, see. Okay. Yes, I know I'm entering. And load in, load in. Excuse me. Yeah, about that apple pie. Okay. You might immediately notice that the brute build that's up on screen is for a clause ice ice. But the build I'm actually playing in the upper left hand corner is ice, or rather clause ice stone. And this was uh it's like I can remember why I did it. I was uh, and I talked about this in previous streams where people go, well, you get more damage out of this power set compared to this power set in the tertiaries. And I kind of sit back and go, animation timings are a thing. Attack chains are a thing. No, you're not actually getting any more damage. And this build was an implementation of that. So she's running the Stone Mastery with Stone Prison, Fossilize, and Stalagmites. And as you can look over, you can see some of the things that were done in this build to make it a farming 707 farming capable build. And one of those was follow up is launched entirely with taunt powers rather than with the damage powers. So in terms of single target damage, compared to other claws, she's a bit down. But the other powers you might notice are the same. Stone Prism picks up the same Ice Blast slotting, and Stalagmite picks up Frozen Blast, just like Ice Storm. Block of Ice picks up the Entomb from Fossilized. So, everything else aside, she is pretty much the same. So, we're actually just going to leave that build up on the background, and we'll just move it down as I now go through the tank build that, well, this was predicated on. And a lot of the things I was looking for was, well, I'm looking for fire cold resist, and there's not a whole lot of powers that actually offer a substantial amount of fire cold resist in slots that can be easily obtained. So this is why all of my armors, frozen armor and glacial armor, have the 3-slotted Gift of the Ancients, is because of that 2.25 resistance cold. And you can see that I picked up some fire cold defense by using Aegis and Permafrost, Aegis and Hoarfrost. And okay, we've also had Gift of the Ancients, so we'll just kind of walk through it step by step. And Frozen Armor, first of all, Luck of the Gambler proc for the recharge time, Gift of the Ancients for the Fire Cold Resist, and if you're going to take Gift of the Ancients, you might as well take the Run Speed proc, and then Kismet for the 2-hit boost. Beheader picking up Hecatomb for the Resistance Fire Cold and the recharge time. Frost gets a split, and that it picks up Endurance Recharge, and Heal Endurance Recharge. This is not by any means pressing the heal into cap. You can see here, even with Spiritual Core active, Hoarfrost is only giving 92.56 heal. And if I go up to accolades, we'll make sure that Freedom Phantom Reserve, Proto Jockey, Tech Force Commander, and Atlas Medallion are turned on. I'll do window advanced totals, and again, I know you can't see this, so I'll just read it off to you. With Hoarfrost active, and this is only with a 92.56% boost to heal, uh, this build runs 3,125 hit points. Now, Tanker HP cap was buffed to 3,534, so this is no longer uh, knocking on the Tanker HP cap, but you're still chowing down with Hoarfrost up 32.09 HP per second. And that's why Hoarfrost is slotted like this. Yes, you could pull out a little more uh, heals out of it, and with Spiritual Core up, Hoarfrost is into Perma at 120 seconds with a duration of 120 seconds. So you can go around all day long with 3,000 plus hit points at level 50. We see we picked up Aegis, which is here for the Fire Cold defense. Kick, well, which keeps getting turned on. And you can also see that Hoarfrost is not responding to the kick recharge time. And if I click on totals, you can see that's not responding to recharge either. So I'm not sure what broke here. Wet Ice, which just gets a single endurance reduction because it does not take any sets. Chilling Embrace, which does take slow sets, and as I've gone into before, there are no toggle slows. Now, you could slot a taunt set in there now, so, but a quick look at Perfect Zinger, and there's no endurance reduction in Perfect Zinger. There's no endurance reduction in Mocking Beratement, there's no endurance reduction in Triumphant Insult, and there's no endurance reduction in Annoyance. So, the best way to slot Chilling Embrace is just a single level 50 plus 5 endurance reduction. Super Jump just picks up A universal travel, speed plus endurance. Icicles, a Frankenslot. And And if we go look at Icicles over here, which is at level 35, you can see it has a different kind of Frankenslot. And Icicles over on the Brute side was the Brute Unrelenting Fury for that regeneration and damage buff. I didn't go all the way for the melee defense because I didn't need it. The Fury of the Gladiator for the resistance buff, and the 3.75 resistant fire with a 2-slot Fury of the Gladiator. Over on the tank side, I did things a little differently. First of all, tanks get a plus resist all proc, and as I've said before, you really want this ATO slotted in your damage toggle over time. The only time you're not going to put it in a damage toggle over time is if you don't have a damage toggle over time. Put it in here, and then you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about attack change. You don't have to worry about forcing extra resist. It's just there. Now, okay, you may not be able to cap it as high as you could by sweet sodding it for your highest base recharge attack, but you're not having to fight for recharge either to maximize the amount of times you can kick it off. You'll also see that I went with a 4-slot overwhelming force instead of a 2-slot Fury of the Gladiator chant for, or 2 slots in Fury of the Gladiator. And this is partially because when I look at totals, I'm already at 82.45%. And later on in this particular build, um, we'll see a reactive defensive scaling resist. So I know that scaling resist, and we'll go and jump ahead. If I turn it off, we can see that our average resist drop by 3 points. And we'll go and turn it back on. And I know that the total resist buff is 10%. So if it's only giving us 3% calculated, then that means as our health falls, it's going to give us 7% more. So 82.45% plus 7% is 89.45%. We're going to be in 0.55% of hard capping fire resist. I really didn't need to slot in another resistant fire, and there's another factor. The ATO proc here, we'll click it off, we'll see that our average resist fell by the 1 stack of the proc. And 1 stack is worth 6.7% resist. Plug it back in, and I'm back within almost 7% of hard cap. This on average will stack up to 3 or 4 times. So 6.7 times 3, or it doesn't even take that. It just takes 6.7 times 2 stacks of icicles, and just a little dip in health on reactive defenses, and I'm into hard cap on fire resist. I really didn't need to add in 2 slots on Fury the Gladiator. That being said, when I made this build, the tanker changes hadn't landed, and scraping out any kind of damage was, well, a bit of a challenge. So if you have a toggle damage over time power on a tank, you generally will see the Fury of the Gladiator chant for resistance debuff, because that's one of the best ways you can lay down a consistent debuff and increase your overall damage. All right. So, and okay, and overwhelming force. Overwhelming force is just in here for that regeneration and hit point boost. Let me give you an idea. If I scroll over Siroko's Dervish, it does have 10% regeneration. It does have a resistance energy, and it's 4% accuracy. Obliteration at 4 slots is resistance smashing lethal, damage buff, accuracy buff. Armageddon I'm already using elsewhere, so that's not an option. Fury of the Gladiator, okay, it does give us knockback protection as we look over the bonuses. It does give us the resistance to fire cold, which we don't need. It does give us a damage buff at 4 slots, and at 5 slots, it does give us resistance to toxic psionic. We're not going to be able to drive it to 6 slots, so there's nothing really in here that helps us. Avalanche were probably also, well, okay, I don't see Avalanche being used immediately. So Avalanche is technically a possibility. So what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for either the tank or ATO, which does give us that recharge time, damage buff, and hit points. And that may be worth thinking about is bringing back some of the slotting from Cleave and putting Avalanche over here because we do get significant amount of hit points, even though we lose some regeneration. So uh, we'll go ahead and kind of scratch pad this. Well, we'll come back and make this change after I work through everything. All right, Taunt picks up chance for psionic damage. Build up just has a single Gaussian proc. Glacial Armor. Again, we come to a little bit of a Frankenslot. We want the Luck of the Gambler proc, as many recharge times as we can fit, the better. We've got the Shield Wall proc. And I just realized we're coming up on 46 minutes. So I'm going to run through this, and then we're going to cut this build as a theory, and then we'll actually start working on the changes on a separate video. All right. Shield Wall proc because we really want that +5 resistance. Glacier Glacial Armor also is picking up the Gift of the Ancients for the resistant cold. Whirling Axe is Armageddon because this is our PBOE, maximum damage possible, so it is going to pick up our most damage capable set. Permafrost, another Frankenslot. This is where you don't get a lot of resist powers in ice armor, so this is where we pick up our steadfast protection, resist defense, and our gladiator's armor defense buff. And this is also where we pick up some more fire cold defense from Aegis. And then we have Tough, which is Aegis for the Fire Cold defense. We have Energy Absorption, which is rocking the Luck of the Gambler proc, the Scaling Resist proc, and it's 3 deep on the reactive defenses, both for the Smash and Lethal. I could maybe do this as Luck of the Gambler instead, um, which would give me both hit points and regeneration, and this is another change where we may look at. And then we have Swoop, which I thought was a from the name you think it's a PBOE, but this is really just the knock 'em in the chin power. You just swoop it up, and it's blistering cold for the chance to hold. This may be one where you might want to knock maybe some kind of knockback mitigation, maybe swap it out for gash, but the base damage on Swoop, 114. Base damage on Gas, 98. Okay, you're not losing a whole lot of damage for that, so that's something to keep in mind. Weave picks up the Luck of the Gambler and Gift of the Ancients. Hibernate, just the preventative medicine proc. It doesn't go all the way because we needed those slots elsewhere. Cleave picks up Might of the Tanker. 4 slot for the damage buff. We may do some slot changes here and bring an Avalanche or maybe Eradication because we get a strong uh, regeneration in there. And we can see we are kept on damage and recharge time, which was really all we were looking for. Pendulum, and it gets 5 slot Superior Gauntlet Fist, and this one picks up the recharge time. And Pendulum is the cone right. This is a cone that goes across in front of you, whereas Cleave is the cone that strikes vertically in front of you. Pendulum goes horizontally. And if you're using Pendulum, you're probably facing the most amount of enemies. That's when you probably want the Absorb to take off. And then Char goes deep for the Entomb buffs. Fire Blast goes deep for the Winter Spite buffs. And Fireball goes deep on Frozen Blast for, again, the fire buffs. And the reason why there's so much effort, because ice is a defense-based power, if I just yes, if I just turn off our defense power for a second, and you can see that ice only gives you defense to smashing lethal energy and negative. It doesn't actually give you any defense to fire cold. It gives you a massive amount of resistance to cold and a pretty good base resistance to fire. And it's by racking up the armors in play, because Frozen armor gives you resist to fire cold, but you can't buff the resistance. Glacial armor gives you resist to cold, but you're already hard capped to cold pretty much anyways. And weave, and there we go. It's just frozen armor. You can see it gives you a hefty amount of fire resistance. And that brings us, so we're basically having to cover the entirety of fire cold defense entirely through IOs. And likewise, you haven't covered the entirety of fire resistance all through IOs. Now, I'm not so worried about smashing lethal resistance because it's very easy to get smashing lethal energy negative defensive soft caps. And if you've got a significant enough regeneration rate, well, if you got a significant enough regeneration rate, you can take a few hits and keep on going. The thing is, why I focused on fire damage specifically, not A, this was a farm build, but also B, because fire doesn't do anything but fire damage. Most of the other damage types have some kind of status effect. So if you can just miss them, you don't get the status effect. But if you get hit with fire, you get hit with the damage over time. And you can see this on the character in the background. Each of the fire attacks is leveraging a DOT on the character. And that's something to keep in mind that because fire adds to fire, if you don't have a lot of fire resist, but you have a lot of fire defense, all it takes is somebody cascading defense de implementing a cascading defense debuff failure. That is, they lower your defense just enough where other attacks that lower defense land, which lower your defense even further, and you've lost all your defense and you have nothing left. Well, if you've got enough regeneration, since almost every other tech is not bringing anything but other status effects, you may be messed for a little while, but you can still power through it. If all you're getting hit with is fire attacks, or primarily fire attacks, and I'm kind of glaring at some particular enemies. Not the manufactured enemies I'm facing up against. Circle of Thorns mostly right now. You can find yourself rapidly debuffed and drown out because you don't have any fire or not a whole lot of fire resistance. One of the reasons why I focus so much on fire is the real pain in the rear end because there's not a whole lot you can do against damage over times other than regenerate out of it or resist it. You can use other utilities to get out of other effects or lay down enough damage. And this is why fire is such a good benchmark of how much damage can you practically take because those fire enemies are delivering more damage than most other non-debuffing groups will damage, and it's an important distinction. And if you kind of focus on that end, you'll wind up with other buffs that can be just as useful. The endurance recovery, the energy negative defenses, you wind up with resist to speed slowdowns. So even if someone hits you with a slow event, you can just shrug it off. Those are other factors to keep in mind. All right, we're at 54 minutes. So I'll just lock this off as the theory side of it, and then we'll get to the actual manipulation of the builds when I come back.